Welcome back, everyone, to Echoes of Ihsan. Today, we're going to do a deep dive into something really fundamental to Islamic practice, and that's fasting, as detailed in Sahih Bukhari, Book 31, which is dedicated to fasting.
It's such a rich collection of hadiths, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I mean, you sent over a fascinating set, and it's clear that you're interested in kind of going deeper than just like the basic rules of what's allowed, what's not allowed.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. These hadith really bring those early days of Islam to life.
Yeah.
It's not just a dry rule book. You get these glimpses of how the Prophet Muhammad taught and how those early Muslims actually lived out these practices.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. One of the first things that stood out to me was Hadith 115.
Okay.
It's like a scene straight out of history. You know, you have this Bedouin coming to the Prophet and asking about the fundamentals of Islam.
It's such a powerful moment because it lays out those core pillars of the faith right there.
Right.
And the Prophet emphasizes the 5 daily prayers, of course, the declaration of faith. And right up there with them is fasting during Ramadan.
Yeah.
So it shows us just how fundamental this practice is.
Yeah, and what I thought was really interesting is that even in that foundational Hadith,
Yeah.
there's already this emphasis on intention.
Right.
It's not just about the actions, but the why behind them.
Exactly. And that theme of intention runs through so many of these hadiths.
Right.
Like when we get to 116 and 117, we see this play out around the day of Ashura.
Yeah.
And this day had historical significance even before Islam as a time when the Quraysh tribe would fast.
Okay, so initially, the Prophet Muhammad, when he arrived in Medina,
Yeah.
he instructed Muslims to fast on Ashura as well.
Exactly. He said fast it.
Right. So what changed?
Well, this is where it gets really fascinating.
Yeah.
Later on, the Prophet actually made it clear that fasting on Ashura was optional.
Wow.
And he even suggested that Muslims fast on either the 9th and 10th of Muharram or the 10th and 11th to kind of differentiate it from what the Jewish community was doing at the time.
It's really interesting how it highlights that Islamic practices weren't just about blindly following tradition,
Right.
but about this mindful intention and establishing a distinct identity.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. And
Yeah.
this idea of conscious action ties beautifully into what we see in Hadith 118.
Oh.
Here, the Prophet goes beyond just what we abstain from during a fast and talks about our inner state,
Right.
guarding our tongues, being mindful of our actions. These become even more important while fasting.
Right. It's not just about an empty stomach.
It's not.
There's this whole deeper purification happening.
Yes.
Like aligning our inner and outer selves.
And he uses such striking imagery to get this point across.
Yep.
He actually says the smell of a fasting person's breath is more pleasing to God than the scent of musk.
Oh, wow.
Like, it's not about outward appearances.
Right.
It's about this unseen transformation happening within.
That's such a vivid way to describe it. This
Mhm.
internal fragrance.
Right?
That's more precious than any perfume.
And he goes on in this hadith
Yeah.
to describe fasting as a shield.
Okay, what does that mean? Like a shield. Is
Yeah.
it protection from, physical harm?
It's actually much broader than that. So
Right.
he explains that fasting shields us from trials and temptations.
Oh,
Imagine it like building spiritual resilience.
Right.
It's like exercise for our souls.
So,
When we practice self-control and turn towards God during a fast,
yeah.
we're strengthening our ability to face challenges in life with more strength and clarity.
So it's not necessarily about preventing bad things from happening,
Right.
but it's about equipping ourselves to kind of navigate them better.
Exactly. It's about cultivating this inner strength and resilience and this protection, this shielding.
Yeah.
According to Hadith, 120 actually extends beyond this life.
Okay.
It describes a special gate in paradise called Orion that's reserved for those who fasted sincerely.
It's amazing how these hadiths connect this physical act of fasting
Yeah.
to these like profound spiritual concepts. Like it's this bridge between our worldly actions and the hereafter.
Beautiful imagery, right.
Yeah. And it's not just about the afterlife.
Right.
Several of the hadiths highlight the blessings and rewards of fasting in this life as well.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Hadith 122 mentions that the gates of paradise are open during Ramadan.
Yes.
And 123 adds that the gates of hell are closed.
And the devils are chained up.
Wow, it's like this heightened spiritual energy.
Yeah.
Yes. Even the unseen realms are responding to the collective devotion of those who are fasting.
Yeah, it really paints this picture of a spiritual shift that happens during Ramadan.
Yeah, it sounds like an incredibly potent time for growth and seeking forgiveness.
Absolutely. And Hadith 125 specifically states that sincere fasting during Ramadan can actually lead to the forgiveness of past sins.
It's such a powerful reminder that Ramadan is about so much more than just abstaining from food. It's a time for this profound spiritual renewal.
And this spirit of renewal seems to have extended even to the Prophet Muhammad himself.
Oh,
Hadith 126 describes him as being exceptionally generous during Ramadan, as if
I love that.
the act of fasting amplified his spirit of giving.
It shows that, fasting isn't meant to make us withdraw from the world or become, stingy or anything. It's about cultivating that compassion and extending it outwards.
It's a beautiful concept, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And that outward expression of compassion
Yes.
is balanced with this inward reflection as well.
Yes.
Which is highlighted in Hadith 127.
That's right.
Which advises against engaging in falsehood and evil actions while fasting.
Exactly.
So it's not just about what we put into our bodies, but what comes out of us through our words and our actions.
Precisely. The Prophet makes it very clear that simply abstaining from food and drink while continuing to lie or cheat or harm others is not true fasting.
Right.
True fasting is about aligning our inner and outer selves.
It's about living with integrity.
Yes.
Even more so during a fast.
And in Hadith 128 actually reinforces this by describing two pleasures of fasting: the joy of breaking the fast and the ultimate joy of meeting God on the Day of Judgment.
Wow.
So it's a powerful reminder that the true reward for sincere fasting extends far beyond this worldly life.
Speaking of the physical and spiritual aspects of fasting, Hadith 129 mentions that fasting can help control desires.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
The Prophet Muhammad actually recommended fasting for those who are unmarried and unable to marry as a means of managing their sexual desires.
Okay, so it highlights this practical application of fasting as a tool for self-discipline and managing impulses.
Right, this self-control, this ability to choose to deny ourselves something permissible, strengthens our ability to resist what is forbidden.
It's fascinating to see how fasting can be a practice that kind of spills over into other areas of our lives, helping us develop self-control in various ways.
Exactly.
But let's get back to the practicalities of actually observing a fast.
Yes.
We can't forget about those. Several hadiths talk about the importance of accurately determining the beginning and end of the fasting period.
You're absolutely right. Hadiths 130, 131, 132, 133, 134, and 135 all reiterate the importance of relying on the sighting of the new moon to determine the start and end of Ramadan. They emphasize that we shouldn't fast before seeing the crescent moon, and that if the sky is overcast, we should complete the month of Shaban as 30 days.
So it sounds like these hadiths provide really clear guidelines for accurately establishing the lunar months and avoiding any confusion or uncertainty among the Muslim community. It makes me wonder, was there some initial confusion about how to determine the lunar months that led to these repeated clarifications?
That's very likely the case.
Yeah.
Imagine relying solely on the naked eye to observe that delicate sliver of the new moon, especially in desert conditions where dust and haze can obscure the horizon.
Yeah.
It's understandable that clear and consistent guidelines were needed.
Yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of the social and cultural context, Hadith 137 describes Muslims as an illiterate nation who don't write or keep accounts. Could this have contributed to the challenges of determining those lunar months as well?
It's definitely a possibility. This hadith provides valuable context.
Yeah.
If reliance on memory and oral traditions was predominant, then the need for clear and repeated instructions from the Prophet becomes even more important.
Right.
These hadiths weren't just abstract rulings.
Right.
They were practical solutions to real-world challenges faced by that early Muslim community.
It's a reminder that religious teachings often arise in response to the specific needs and circumstances of a community. Now, Hadith 138 advises against fasting a day or two before Ramadan.
Yes.
Unless it's part of one's regular fasting routine.
This hadith highlights the importance of humility and intentionality in our religious practices. Fasting right before Ramadan might be seen as trying to outdo the obligatory fast, or as implying that Ramadan itself isn't sufficient.
It's a really nuanced point that I hadn't considered before. Right. It's about recognizing that even acts of devotion should be undertaken with the right mindset and a sincere desire to please God, not to impress others or elevate ourselves.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And sometimes, even with the best intentions, things can go awry.
Right.
Hadith 139 recounts an incident where one of the Prophet's companions, Qais bin Sirma al-Ansari, accidentally overfasted.
Wait, how do you accidentally overfast?
Well, he fell asleep before breaking his fast and continued to abstain from food and drink throughout the night and the following day.
Oh, wow.
He mistakenly thought he couldn't break his fast once he had missed the sunset meal.
So basically, he fasted for like over 24 hours straight, thinking that was required.
He did.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
It was, and this incident led to a really significant development in Islamic law.
Oh, wow.
It actually prompted the revelation of verses in the Quran clarifying that eating and drinking during the night while fasting is perfectly permissible.
So an accidental overfasting actually contributed to a deeper and more compassionate understanding of the rules.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of how Islamic teachings evolved through this process of revelation and interpretation and practical application.
Speaking of practical application, Hadiths 140 and 141 mention people tying black and white threads to their legs to try and distinguish between night and day for breaking their fast.
It paints a rather amusing picture, doesn't it?
It does.
Imagine people fumbling with these threads in the dim light, trying to figure out if it was time to eat.
Yeah, it definitely highlights the challenges of accurately determining the time for breaking the fast, especially before the advent of modern timekeeping devices.
You're right.
Right.
Thankfully, these verses were later clarified to refer to the darkness of the night and the whiteness of the dawn, making it much easier to determine the appropriate time.
That's a relief. I can't imagine relying on threads to figure out when to break my fast.
Yeah.
But what about people who might not be able to see the dawn clearly?
Yeah.
Perhaps due to vision impairment or weather conditions.
Hadith 142 addresses this specific scenario. The Prophet advised people to break their fast when they heard the call to prayer from Ibn Maktum, who was known to be particularly careful in waiting for the true dawn before making the call.
Okay.
This practice ensured that everyone, regardless of their ability to see, could break their fast at the proper time.
It's another great example of how Islamic teachings strive to be inclusive and accommodating.
Yeah.
Recognizing that not everyone experiences the world in the same way.
Exactly. It speaks to the sensitivity and practicality of Islamic guidance, always seeking to facilitate worship and remove unnecessary barriers.
Right.
Now let's delve into an important aspect of fasting, and that's the pre-dawn meal known as suhoor.
Suhoor, yes. It's such a vital part of the fasting experience, providing that much-needed energy boost to kind of get through the day.
You're right. Hadiths 143 and 144 emphasize the importance of having this meal before starting the fast.
Right.
And 144 even gives us a sense of the time frame, stating that the interval between suhoor and the call to prayer was sufficient to recite 50 verses of the Quran.
Wow. That gives us a tangible idea of the time allotted for suhoor.
Yes.
It wasn't a rushed affair.
No.
But a dedicated time for nourishment before embarking on the day's fast.
Exactly.
But speaking of time frames, Hadith 145 describes the Prophet Muhammad fasting continuously for days, which his companions found difficult to emulate.
That's right.
I can imagine.
The Prophet explained that he was able to do this because he received sustenance directly from God during the night.
Okay.
It highlights the unique nature of prophets and their special relationship with the divine.
It's a reminder that while we should strive to follow the Prophet's example, we also need to recognize our own limitations. And not push ourselves beyond our capacity.
Absolutely. And speaking of recognizing limitations, Hadith 146 emphasizes the blessings of the suhoor meal, encouraging us to nourish our bodies to better withstand the physical demands of fasting.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful reminder that caring for our physical well-being is also a part of our spiritual practice.
It's this holistic approach,
Yes.
acknowledging that our physical and spiritual selves are interconnected.
Exactly. And while the practice of fasting is generally encouraged, there were situations where it was discouraged, even on special days like Ashura.
Yes.
Hadith 147 describes the Prophet sending a messenger on the day of Ashura to announce that those who had already eaten should complete their fast, while those who hadn't eaten should continue their fast.
Okay, so it seems like he was emphasizing consistency.
Yes.
And avoiding disruption once a fast had begun.
Exactly.
Even on a day with special significance.
It's about honoring the commitment we've made to the practice.
It shows a level of practicality and understanding. Not everyone would be aware of the significance of Ashura.
Right.
So it was considerate to allow them to continue their regular routines without feeling pressured to change their plans.
Exactly. The Hadiths demonstrate a balanced approach acknowledging both the spiritual ideals and the realities of human life.
And let's transition to another interesting topic.
Okay.
Intimacy between spouses during Ramadan. Hadiths 148 and 149 address this delicate subject.
This is where we see the nuanced understanding of human nature within Islamic teachings. Hadith 148 clarifies that intimacy between spouses during the night does not invalidate the fast as long as the necessary purification rituals are performed before dawn.
Oh,
It provides practical guidance for married couples navigating this aspect of their relationship during Ramadan.
it's refreshing to see such open and practical guidance on a topic that's often considered taboo or private.
Right, Islam doesn't shy away from addressing these real-life issues, providing clear guidelines while acknowledging the complexities of human relationships.
And Hadith 149 expands on this, stating that kissing and embracing are also permissible while fasting.
Yes, but it's important to note that the Prophet emphasized his own ability to control his desires as being greater than most people's.
Right.
The Hadith concludes by stating that if someone experiences a sexual discharge after merely looking at their spouse, they should complete their fast.
It seems like a delicate balance between acknowledging human nature and encouraging restraint during the fast.
It's a reminder that we each have our own individual struggles, and that we should strive for sincere intention and self-control while recognizing our limitations.
Right.
It's not about comparing ourselves to others,
Yeah.
but focusing on our own personal journey.
It's a beautiful message of
Mhm.
self-awareness and striving for excellence within our own capacity.
Absolutely. And to further emphasize this understanding and compassion, Hadiths 150 and 151 reiterate the permissibility of physical affection between spouses while fasting.
It's wonderful to see how the Hadiths provide this level of detail and guidance for everyday life, acknowledging the human experience within the framework of faith.
It's a reminder that Islam is a practical religion offering guidance for all aspects of our lives, from the most mundane to the most intimate.
Hadith 152 offers a glimpse into the Prophet's personal practices, describing how he would take a bath in the morning during Ramadan, even if he hadn't had a wet dream.
This hadith highlights the Prophet's emphasis on ritual purity, even beyond what was strictly required. It shows his commitment to maintaining a state of spiritual and physical cleanliness throughout the day, even while fasting.
It's fascinating to see these glimpses into his daily life, humanizing him and making his practices more relatable.
It is, and to further emphasize this point, Hadith 153 confirms that the Prophet would sometimes take a bath in the morning during Ramadan, even without a ritual need, and continue his fast.
Okay.
It suggests that this practice was more about personal preference and maintaining a heightened state of spiritual awareness.
It shows that even within the framework of religious obligations, there's room for individual choices and preferences that can enhance our spiritual experience.
Exactly. Islam encourages us to find those practices that resonate with us and deepen our connection with God, even if they go beyond the bare minimum requirements.
Now let's address a common concern for those who are new to fasting. Accidentally eating or drinking while fasting.
Yeah.
Hadith 154 provides reassurance in these situations.
This hadith is a beautiful example of the mercy and compassion embedded within Islamic teachings.
Oh.
It states that if someone eats or drinks forgetfully,
Yeah.
they should simply continue their fast, as it's considered a provision from God.
It removes so much anxiety and guilt for those who might worry about accidentally breaking their fast.
Exactly. It's a reminder that God understands our human weaknesses and doesn't punish us for unintentional mistakes.
And speaking of unintentional actions, the Hadith also mentions the use of siwak, a natural toothbrush, while fasting.
This practice was common during the Prophet's time, and he encouraged its use even while fasting to maintain oral hygiene and purity.
Okay.
Siwak is made from the twigs of a particular tree and has natural cleansing properties.
It's another example of how Islamic teachings emphasize cleanliness and hygiene even during periods of fasting.
Absolutely. Cleanliness is considered a fundamental aspect of faith, both physically and spiritually.
Now, Hadith 155 seems a bit out of place in a chapter about fasting.
Yeah.
It describes the Prophet's ablution, the ritual washing before prayer.
You're right. It does seem a bit tangential at first glance.
Yeah.
But it highlights the importance of purification in general,
Right.
which is a concept that permeates all aspects of Islamic practice, including fasting.
It's a reminder that our physical actions and spiritual state are interconnected. When we purify our bodies, we're also preparing ourselves for prayer and cultivating a state of inner cleanliness.
Precisely. It's about creating harmony between our inner and outer selves, aligning our physical actions with our spiritual aspirations. Now let's move on to a more sensitive topic.
Okay.
The consequences of intentionally breaking the fast, specifically through sexual intercourse.
This seems like a serious matter. What do the Hadiths say about it?
Hadith 156 describes a man who confessed to having intercourse with his wife during Ramadan.
Oh, wow.
The Prophet instructed him to give a basket of dates in charity as expiation for his actions.
So there are specific acts of atonement for intentionally breaking the fast.
Yes, the Hadiths outline a hierarchy of expiatory actions, starting with freeing a slave, then fasting for 2 consecutive months, then feeding 60 poor people.
Wow.
It's a way to acknowledge the transgression and seek forgiveness through acts of charity and devotion.
What if someone can't afford to do any of those things?
Hadiths 157 and 158 address this very scenario.
Okay.
They provide an example of a man who couldn't afford any of the prescribed expiations.
Right.
In his case, the Prophet instructed him to simply feed his own family with a basket of dates.
It's incredibly compassionate and understanding, recognizing that not everyone has the same resources or capacity to perform grand gestures of atonement.
Yeah.
It emphasizes that sincerity and doing what we can within our means are more important than elaborate displays of piety.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful example of how Islamic law strives to be just and equitable, taking into account individual circumstances and offering practical solutions for seeking forgiveness.
Now, what about medical procedures? Do they break the fast?
That's a great question.
That seems like an important consideration,
Yeah.
especially for those managing chronic illnesses or requiring medical attention during Ramadan.
Hadiths 159 and 160 shed light on this.
Right.
They mention the Prophet undergoing cupping, a traditional medical practice involving suction cups while he was fasting.
Right.
This indicates that cupping doesn't invalidate the fast.
That's reassuring for people who rely on regular medical treatments or might require emergency care during Ramadan.
Absolutely. It shows that Islamic teachings prioritize well-being and recognize the need for medical interventions even while observing a fast. However, Hadith 161 adds a caveat clarifying that cupping is permissible as long as it doesn't weaken the person fasting.
So it emphasizes the importance of using common sense
Yeah.
and prioritizing one's health when making decisions about medical procedures during Ramadan.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance between observing religious obligations and ensuring our physical well-being.
Now let's shift our focus back to the guidelines surrounding the act of breaking the fast. Hadith 162 recounts an incident where the Prophet instructed a companion to prepare a drink for him before sunset, emphasizing that the fast should be broken as soon as night falls.
This hadith underscores the importance of following the prescribed timings for religious practices.
Oh.
Just as there's a specific time for beginning the fast,
Yeah.
there's a specific time for ending it as well.
It emphasizes the importance of precision and adherence to the guidelines,
Yes.
ensuring that we're fulfilling our obligations in a timely and accurate manner.
You've got it. And this emphasis on adhering to guidelines doesn't mean there's no room for flexibility in certain situations,
Right.
especially when it comes to traveling.
Ah, yes. Traveling often presents unique challenges for maintaining religious practices.
Yeah.
What do the Hadith say about fasting while on a journey?
This is where we see the compassionate and understanding nature of Islamic teaching shining through.
Okay.
Hadith 163 mentions a companion who was extremely dedicated to fasting even while traveling. However, in Hadith 164, the Prophet gave him the option to fast or not, while traveling, acknowledging the difficulty of maintaining a fast during a journey.
So it's not a strict obligation to fast while traveling.
It's not. The Prophet Muhammad himself demonstrated this flexibility.
Okay.
Hadith 165 describes him breaking his fast during a journey in Ramadan, and those accompanying him followed suit.
It shows that he practiced what he preached,
Mhm.
adapting his own actions to the specific situation and prioritizing the well-being of those around him.
Exactly. He recognized that traveling can be physically demanding and that maintaining a fast under those circumstances might not always be feasible or beneficial.
And to further emphasize this point, Hadiths 166 and 167 explicitly state that it's not considered righteous to fast on a journey,
Yes.
especially if it causes hardship.
These hadiths highlight the compassion within Islamic law, acknowledging that people's abilities and circumstances can vary, and that forcing oneself to fast under difficult conditions might not be pleasing to God.
It's a reminder that Islam values balance and encourages us to prioritize our well-being without compromising our commitment to faith.
Absolutely. And this compassion extends to how we interact with others who might be choosing to fast or not fast while traveling.
Okay?
Hadith 168 mentions that during journeys with the Prophet,
Yeah.
those who were fasting didn't criticize those who weren't, and vice versa.
It's a beautiful example of tolerance and mutual respect,
Yes.
recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all approach to religious practice.
You've got it. Hadith 169 further clarifies that The Prophet sometimes fasted and sometimes didn't fast during journeys, leaving the choice to individuals based on their own capacity and preference.
It's about personal agency and recognizing that each individual's relationship with God is unique.
Precisely, it's about finding that sweet spot where religious observance intersects with personal well-being and honoring the wisdom behind both guidance and individual choice.
It's a powerful message,
It is.
reminding us that ultimately our spiritual journey is between us and God,
Mm.
and that we should strive to make choices that align with our individual needs and circumstances.
Precisely. It's about finding that sweet spot where religious observance intersects with personal well-being and honoring the wisdom behind both guidance and individual choice.
Now let's move on to the topic of making up for missed fasts.
Huh?
Hadith 170 mentions a verse in the Quran that initially allowed for feeding a poor person for each missed fast, but this ruling was later abrogated.
This hadith highlights the evolving nature of Islamic jurisprudence.
Okay.
As the understanding of the faith deepened, certain rulings were refined or replaced with clearer guidelines.
Okay.
In this case, the current ruling requires making up for missed fasts by fasting on other days rather than offering a substitute act of charity.
It shows the dynamic nature of Islamic law adapting to new understandings and seeking to establish the most just and equitable practices.
Exactly. It's a process of continuous learning and refinement, ensuring that the spirit of the faith is upheld while addressing the practical realities of human life.
And speaking of practical realities,
Yeah.
Hadith 171 mentions Aisha, the Prophet's wife, making up for missed fasts during the months of Shaban.
This hadith highlights the permissibility of making up for missed fasts at any time before the arrival of the next Ramadan.
Oh.
It also offers a glimpse into the busy and demanding life of Aisha, who often prioritized serving the Prophet and fulfilling her duties as his wife over her personal religious obligations.
It's a reminder that even the most devout individuals can face challenges in fulfilling all their religious duties, and that Islam acknowledges and accommodates these realities.
Absolutely. It's about striving for balance, recognizing our limitations, and prioritizing our responsibilities without compromising our commitment to God.
What about women who miss fasts due to menstruation?
Yeah.
Is there a specific ruling for them?
Hadith 172 addresses this, directly acknowledging that women are exempt from fasting during their menstrual period. It even uses the term defect to describe this exemption.
Okay.
Not in a negative sense, but simply to acknowledge that women are unable to participate fully in this form of worship during that time.
It's refreshing to see such explicit acknowledgement and accommodation for women's biological realities within religious teachings.
It speaks to the sensitivity and practicality of Islamic guidance, recognizing the diverse experiences of individuals and providing specific rulings to adjust these differences.
Now, what happens in cases where someone dies before fulfilling their fasting obligations?
Hadith 173 provides guidance on this,
Okay.
stating that if someone dies and owes fasts from Ramadan, their guardian should fast on their behalf.
Okay.
It underscores the importance of honoring commitments even beyond death.
It's a beautiful concept, recognizing the continuity of spiritual responsibility and the interconnectedness between this life and the next.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of fulfilling our obligations to God to the best of our ability, both for ourselves and for those entrusted to our care.
Okay, let's circle back to the specific guidelines for breaking the fast. We've touched on this earlier, but several hadiths emphasize this aspect.
You're right. Hadiths 175, 176, and 177 all reiterate the importance of breaking the fast promptly at sunset without unnecessary delay. They narrate incidents where the Prophet repeatedly urged his companions to prepare a drink for him as soon as night fell, clarifying that there should be no procrastination in ending the fast.
It seems like there might have been some confusion or cultural practices that led to delaying the breaking of the fast, prompting these repeated reminders from the Prophet.
It's possible perhaps some people were accustomed to waiting for a specific star to appear or following other traditional customs that didn't align with the Islamic guidelines.
And Hadith 178 goes a step further, stating that people will remain on the right path as long as they hasten the breaking of the fast.
This hadith emphasizes the importance of following the Prophet's example and adhering to established practices.
Okay.
It suggests that deviating from these norms could lead to straying from the right path.
It's a reminder that religious practice should be based on authentic teachings and not on personal interpretations or cultural influences that might contradict the spirit of the faith.
And you've got it.
Right.
It's about recognizing the wisdom behind these rulings and understanding that they're designed to guide us towards spiritual excellence.
Now let's explore a hadith that addresses a specific situation related to breaking the fast.
Okay.
Hadith 179 describes a scenario where the companions broke their fast on a cloudy day, mistakenly thinking the sun had set, but then the sun reappeared.
Oops.
That must have been a frustrating experience for them, realizing they had ended their fast prematurely.
It definitely highlights the importance of being absolutely certain about sunset before breaking the fast.
Yeah, but what happened in this case?
Yeah.
Did they have to make up for that fast?
The hadith mentions that it had to be made up for, but it doesn't specify whether they actually did so. It serves as a cautionary tale, reminding us to err on the side of caution and double check, especially when weather conditions are uncertain.
It's a good reminder to be extra vigilant and avoid making assumptions when it comes to fulfilling our religious obligations.
Absolutely. It's better to be safe than sorry, and ensure that we're observing the fast in a way that aligns with the prescribed guidelines.
Okay, let's shift our focus back to the day of Ashura, as we discussed earlier. Hadith 180 describes a heartwarming tradition associated with this day.
This hadith mentions families preparing special toys for their children who were fasting on Ashura, giving them the toys if they cried or became restless.
That's sweet.
It shows how the community adapted religious practices to make them accessible and engaging for young children.
It's a beautiful example of how faith can be integrated into family life and made relatable for younger generations.
Absolutely. It reminds us that religion shouldn't be a rigid or burdensome practice, but rather a source of joy, connection, and meaningful experiences for all ages.
Now let's delve into a topic that seems to have generated some debate during the Prophet's time.
Okay.
The practice of fasting continuously without breaking the fast at night, known as al-Wisal.
You're right. This is a practice that comes up frequently in the hadiths, and the Prophet's stance on it is quite clear. Hadiths 182, 183, 184, and 185 all mention him explicitly forbidding the practice of al-Wisal.
Why was it discouraged so strongly? It seems like an act of intense devotion, but perhaps there were concerns about its impact on health and well-being.
You're spot on. The hadiths explain that al-Wisal was simply too physically demanding for most people and could lead to health problems. The Prophet emphasized that he wasn't like others because God provided him with sustenance during the night, enabling him to fast continuously.
So it was a practice that was only possible for prophets due to their unique relationship with God.
Exactly. And even though the Prophet himself could fast continuously, he discouraged others from doing so out of concern for their well-being.
It shows his compassion and understanding of human limitations. He recognized that pushing ourselves to extremes could be detrimental to our health and that Islam values balance and moderation.
Precisely. And despite his repeated warnings, some people insisted on continuing the practice of al-Wisal.
What happened then? Did the Prophet address their persistence?
He did. Hadith 186 describes a rather remarkable incident where the Prophet actually fasted continuously along with his companions for 2 days to demonstrate the difficulty of al-Wisal.
Wow.
He only stopped when the crescent moon appeared, marking the end of Ramadan.
It sounds like he was trying to make a point through his actions rather than just words.
Exactly. He wanted to show them firsthand how challenging and potentially harmful al-Wisal could be, encouraging them to follow his guidance and prioritize their health.
It's an interesting example of the Prophet using different teaching methods to convey his message.
It is. He was a master communicator, using both words and actions to guide his followers towards a balanced and fulfilling understanding of faith.
Hadiths 187 and 188 further reiterate the Prophet's prohibition of al-Wisal, urging people to fast only within their capacity and to prioritize their health and well-being.
Yes, these hadiths emphasize the importance of balance and moderation in religious practice. Islam promotes a holistic approach, recognizing the interconnectedness of our physical, mental, and spiritual health.
It's a reminder that pushing ourselves to extremes is not always the best way to serve God, and that true devotion lies in caring for ourselves and honoring our limitations.
Beautifully put. Sometimes the most sincere form of worship is recognizing our humanness and striving for balance in all aspects of our lives.
Now let's move on to a hadith that provides a beautiful example of this balance.
Okay.
Hadith 189 tells the story of Salman al-Farsi visiting his brother in faith, Abu Darda.
This hadith is a gem.
Yeah.
It highlights the importance of giving each aspect of our lives its due attention and finding that sweet spot between our spiritual aspirations and our worldly responsibilities.
It sounds like Abu Darda was a very devout man.
Yeah.
What was the issue that Salman observed?
Salman found Abu Darda so engrossed in fasting and prayer that he was neglecting his family and his own physical needs.
Oh, wow.
He was so focused on his spiritual pursuits that he was neglecting other essential aspects of his life.
So what did Salman do in this situation?
He gently reminded Abu Darda that he had obligations to his Lord, his soul, and his family. He encouraged him to eat, sleep, and spend quality time with his wife.
It sounds like a valuable lesson in moderation and prioritizing different responsibilities.
It is, and when Abu Darda relayed this advice to the Prophet Muhammad, he confirmed that Salman had spoken the truth.
Wow. So the Prophet himself endorsed this balanced approach.
He did it beautifully, demonstrates that Islam values a balanced approach to life, recognizing that our spiritual well-being is intertwined with our physical, emotional, and social well-being.
It's such a powerful reminder to live with intention, finding harmony between our different roles and responsibilities, and recognizing that true devotion encompasses all aspects of our lives, not just our spiritual pursuits.
Exactly. And speaking of the Prophet's own example, several hadiths offer insights into his personal fasting habits outside of Ramadan.
I'm always curious to learn more about the Prophet's daily life and how he integrated his spiritual practices into his everyday routine.
Well, Hadith 190 describes his fasting habits as being both consistent and flexible. It states that he would sometimes fast so frequently that people thought he would never stop, and then he would abstain from fasting to the point where they thought he would never fast again.
It sounds like he struck a balance between regularity and flexibility, adapting his fasting practices to his needs and circumstances.
Precisely, he embodied a dynamic approach to worship, demonstrating that consistency doesn't necessarily mean rigidity.
Hadith 191 adds further detail to this picture,
Yes.
stating that the Prophet never fasted for a full month, except for Ramadan, and that he fasted more in Shaban, the month preceding Ramadan, than in any other month.
This observation suggests that Shaban might have held a special significance for him as a time of preparation for Ramadan.
Well,
A period for gradually increasing his fasting and intensifying his spiritual focus in anticipation of the holy month.
it's like a spiritual warm-up,
Yeah.
a way to ease into the heightened devotion and self-discipline of Ramadan.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of approaching spiritual practices with intentionality and a gradual, mindful progression.
And this emphasis on mindful progression is further highlighted in the Hadith's mention of the Prophet's encouragement to perform good deeds consistently, even if they're small, rather than overwhelming ourselves with excessive acts of worship that we might struggle to maintain.
It's a valuable reminder that consistency and quality are more important than quantity when it comes to our religious practices.
Right.
It's about cultivating a sustainable rhythm of worship that we can maintain over the long term, rather than engaging in bursts of intense piety that might lead to burnout or neglect of other responsibilities.
It's a lesson that resonates deeply with me. It's so easy to get caught up in the idea of grand gestures and extreme acts of devotion. But true spirituality lies in those small, consistent actions that gradually shape our hearts and transform our lives.
Beautifully said. It's about weaving acts of worship into the fabric of our daily routines, making faith a constant companion rather than an occasional visitor.
And to further illustrate the Prophet's balanced approach,
Yeah.
Hadiths 192 and 193 emphasize that he fasted regularly, but never to the point of exhaustion or neglecting his other duties and responsibilities as a leader, husband, father, and friend.
It's a testament to his exemplary character and his ability to integrate spirituality into all aspects of his life without compromising his well-being or neglecting his obligations to others.
It's a powerful reminder that true spirituality isn't about withdrawing from the world or becoming solely focused on our own piety. It's about embracing all aspects of our human experience, finding that delicate balance between our spiritual aspirations and our worldly responsibilities.
Exactly. It's about living a life of purpose and meaning, guided by faith and compassion, where our spiritual practices enhance our lives and empower us to serve God and humanity more effectively.
Hadith 194 offers a fascinating glimpse into the Prophet's flexibility and normalcy,
Yeah.
describing how his companion Anas observed him fasting whenever he wanted and abstaining from fasting whenever he wanted.
This hadith beautifully humanizes the Prophet Muhammad, showing that even he, as a divinely guided individual, adapted his practices to suit his needs and circumstances.
Right.
It reminds us that Islam is a practical religion that acknowledges the realities of human existence and encourages us to find a rhythm of worship that aligns with our individual capacities and lifestyles.
It's reassuring to see that even the Prophet wasn't bound by rigid rules or expectations, but rather embraced a dynamic and personalized approach to his spiritual practices.
It's a powerful message for us all, encouraging us to find that sweet spot between adhering to guidelines and honoring our individual needs and circumstances.
Now let's delve into a specific fasting regimen that the Prophet praised highly, the fasting of Prophet David.
This is a fascinating practice that highlights the value of balance and sustainability in our religious observances.
Okay.
Hadith 195 simply states that Prophet David used to fast for half the year.
Wow, that sounds incredibly challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Fasting every other day for 6 months straight requires an immense level of commitment and self-discipline.
It does, and while the Prophet recognized the piety and dedication behind this practice, he didn't recommend it for everyone.
Did he ever suggest this practice to his followers?
He did, but only in certain situations where individuals were exhibiting excessive zeal and potentially jeopardizing their health.
Oh.
Hadith 196 describes a companion, Abdullah bin Amr, who was known for his intense devotion to fasting and prayer.
Okay.
He was pushing himself to his limits, perhaps even beyond.
It sounds like he was incredibly devout and eager to please God through his worship.
He was.
But was his excessive zeal a cause for concern?
It was the Prophet, recognizing the potential harm in such extreme practices, gently cautioned Abdullah against overexerting himself.
Okay.
He recommended that Abdullah follow the example of Prophet David, alternating between fasting and not fasting.
It's a beautiful example of the Prophet's wisdom and compassion.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't condemn Abdullah's devotion,
Right.
but rather guided him towards a more balanced and sustainable approach.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of recognizing our limitations and finding a rhythm of worship that nourishes both our bodies and our souls.
It's about finding that sweet spot between striving for spiritual excellence and honoring our humanness.
Beautifully put. And this recommendation of fasting like Prophet David is reiterated in Hadith 197, where the Prophet explicitly states that it's the best form of fasting.
It's interesting that he considered it the best form of fasting, even though it wasn't as intense or demanding as fasting every day.
Yeah.
It suggests that balance and sustainability are key factors in determining the value of our spiritual practices.
You're absolutely right. Islam values consistency and mindful engagement over excessive displays of piety.
Right.
It's not about pushing ourselves to the brink of exhaustion, but rather about cultivating a sustainable rhythm of worship that we can maintain throughout our lives.
It's a reminder that our spiritual journey is a marathon, not a sprint,
Yes.
and that we need to pace ourselves to avoid burnout or neglecting other essential aspects of our lives.
Beautifully said. And to further emphasize the importance of balance, Hadith 9098 states that fasting every day throughout one's life is equivalent to not fasting at all.
That's a powerful statement. It suggests that simply going through the motions of fasting without genuine devotion or understanding is meaningless.
Exactly. It's a reminder that our spiritual practices should be undertaken with intentionality, sincerity, and a deep understanding of their purpose.
Right.
It's not about blindly following rules, but rather about engaging our hearts and minds in our acts of worship.
It's about cultivating a conscious and meaningful connection with God through our practices.
Precisely. And to further illustrate this point, Hadith 199 provides another example of the Prophet recommending the fasting of Prophet David to a companion who was eager to increase his fasting frequency.
It seems like the Prophet consistently steered people toward a balanced and sustainable approach to fasting,
He did.
even when they were filled with enthusiasm and a desire to do more.
He recognized that while eagerness and devotion are commendable, they need to be tempered with wisdom and an understanding of our limitations.
It's about channeling that enthusiasm into a sustainable practice that will benefit us in the long run, rather than burning ourselves out with excessive zeal.
It's a beautiful reminder that true spirituality lies in finding that sweet spot between striving for excellence and honoring our humanness.
And this emphasis on honoring our humanness is reiterated in Hadith 200, which explicitly states that fasting every day can be detrimental to one's health,
Yeah.
and that the fasting of Prophet David, with its alternating days of fasting and not fasting, is a superior alternative.
This hadith underscores the importance of listening to our bodies and recognizing that pushing ourselves beyond our limits is not pleasing to God.
It's a reminder that Islam values our well-being and encourages us to approach our spiritual practices with a sense of balance and moderation.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that our physical health is a gift from God and that caring for our bodies is an integral part of our spiritual journey.
Now, Hadith 201 provides another example of the Prophet guiding a companion toward a more balanced approach to fasting.
Yes.
In this instance, a companion expressed a desire to fast more frequently.
Yes, and the prophet, recognizing the companion's enthusiasm, gently steered him towards a more sustainable practice,
Okay.
recommending once again the fasting of Prophet David.
So it reinforces the idea that the prophet consistently emphasized balance and moderation, even in the face of individuals' eagerness to intensify their worship. It's a testament to his wisdom and understanding of human nature. He knew that pushing ourselves too hard could lead to burnout or neglecting other important aspects of life.
Exactly. It's a valuable reminder for us all to find that sweet spot between striving for spiritual excellence and honoring our physical and emotional limitations.
It's about finding a sustainable rhythm that nourishes both our bodies and our souls, allowing us to continue our spiritual journey without burning out or neglecting our other responsibilities.
Absolutely. And speaking of finding a sustainable rhythm, let's explore some specific recommendations for fasting outside of Ramadan.
Okay, I'm eager to learn more about these recommendations. What did the prophet suggest?
He advised his followers to fast 3 days a month.
Okay.
This practice allows individuals to experience the spiritual benefits of fasting on a regular basis without the intensity of a full month like Ramadan.
Right.
Pray 2 rakas of duha prayer. Duha prayer is a voluntary prayer performed in the late morning, typically when the sun has risen to about the height of a spear. It's a beautiful way to connect with God during the day and seek his blessings and guidance.
And the third?
And pray witr before sleeping.
Oh.
Witr is an odd-numbered prayer performed at the end of the night, typically after the Isha prayer. It's a special prayer that concludes the daily cycle of prayers and offers a time for personal reflection and supplication before sleep.
It's fascinating how these recommendations encompass different aspects of worship, from fasting to prayer, highlighting the interconnectedness of various acts of devotion in Islam.
You're absolutely right. It's a reminder that our spiritual journey involves nurturing multiple dimensions of our relationship with God, not just focusing on a single practice.
Right.
These practices complement each other, creating a tapestry of worship that enriches our lives and deepens our connection with the divine.
And it seems like these recommended practices are designed to be easily integrated into daily life,
Yeah.
making spirituality a constant companion rather than an occasional pursuit.
Exactly. It's about cultivating a lifestyle of faith where acts of worship become woven into the fabric of our daily routines, enriching our lives and drawing us closer to God.
And speaking of integrating faith into daily life, Hadith 203 recounts a heartwarming incident that exemplifies the prophet's humility and respect for the practice of fasting.
Yes. This hadith beautifully illustrates the prophet's unassuming nature and his respect for the personal space of others.
Okay.
He was visiting a woman named Sulam, who, in a gesture of hospitality, offered him dates and ghee, common staples in their culture.
Okay.
However, he politely declined explaining that he was fasting.
What's striking about this encounter is the prophet's simplicity and lack of pretense.
Yeah.
He didn't make a show of his fasting or seek praise for his piety.
Exactly. He simply stated his situation matter-of-factly and continued his visit engaging in conversation and offering prayers for Sulam and her family.
It's a beautiful reminder that fasting, while a deeply personal act of devotion,
Yeah.
shouldn't be a source of pride or a means of seeking attention.
Precisely. It's about cultivating a sincere connection with God and allowing that connection to radiate outwards through our actions and interactions. It's about embodying the spirit of humility and compassion that are at the heart of Islamic teachings.
Now, shifting our focus to the period after Ramadan,
Mhm.
Hadith 204 mentions a specific recommendation for those seeking to continue their spiritual momentum.
Yes.
Fasting for 2 days in Shawwal, the month following Ramadan.
This practice is seen as a way to compensate for any shortcomings or imperfections in our observance of Ramadan.
Oh.
It's a beautiful recognition that we're all human and that our efforts, however sincere, might not always be perfect.
It's like a spiritual safety net, offering us an opportunity to make up for missed opportunities or to extend the blessings of Ramadan into the following month.
You've beautifully captured the essence of this practice.
Yeah.
It's not about dwelling on our mistakes, but rather about seeking continuous improvement and striving to deepen our connection with God.
And it highlights the merciful and forgiving nature of Islam, always offering pathways for redemption and returning to God.
Exactly. It's a reminder that God is always welcoming us back, offering us countless opportunities to purify ourselves and strengthen our relationship with Him.
Now let's move on to some guidelines regarding days when fasting is specifically prohibited.
Okay.
I'm curious about these prohibitions. What days are we talking about and what's the reasoning behind these restrictions?
Hadiths 205 and 206 address the issue of fasting on Fridays.
Okay.
The Prophet specifically forbade fasting on Fridays unless it was part of a longer fast that included the day before or after Friday.
So fasting on a Friday by itself is not allowed.
Exactly. This ruling underscores the special status of Friday in Islam.
Oh.
It's a day of communal prayer and celebration, marked by the congregational Jumu'ah prayer, which replaces the usual noon prayer. Fasting on this day is generally discouraged to avoid any conflict with these communal activities.
It makes sense. Friday is a time for coming together as a community, strengthening our bonds and reaffirming our shared faith. Fasting, while a beautiful act of worship, is primarily a personal and introspective practice that might detract from the collective spirit of Friday.
You've articulated the reasoning behind this prohibition perfectly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the importance of communal worship and prioritizing the collective over the individual in this specific context. And to further illustrate this point, Hadith 207 recounts an incident where the Prophet encountered a woman who was fasting on Friday.
What happened in this encounter? Did the Prophet address her fasting?
He did, with his characteristic gentleness and wisdom. He instructed her to break her fast, emphasizing the prohibition of fasting on Friday unless it was part of a longer established fast. It shows his commitment to upholding this ruling and ensuring that his companions understood its significance.
It's fascinating to see how these rulings were implemented in real-life situations, providing practical guidance for the early Muslim community.
Absolutely. The Hadiths offer us a window into the lived experience of the Prophet and his companions, demonstrating how these teachings were put into practice and clarified in everyday life.
Now let's shift our focus to another special day,
Okay.
the Day of Arafat, a pivotal day during the annual Hajj pilgrimage.
You're right. This day holds immense spiritual weight for Muslims worldwide, as it's the day when pilgrims gather on the plain of Arafat, seeking God's forgiveness and mercy.
Right.
It's a day of intense supplication, repentance, and spiritual renewal.
Given its significance, one might assume that fasting is highly recommended on this day, but the Hadiths seem to suggest otherwise.
You've picked up on a subtle but important point.
Yeah.
Hadiths 209 and 210 describe how people were uncertain whether the Prophet himself was fasting on the day of Arafat. To clarify the matter, someone sent him milk while he was at Arafat and he drank it, indicating that he wasn't fasting.
So these actions imply that fasting on the day of Arafat is not obligatory even for those performing Hajj.
Exactly. The Prophet's actions serve as a practical demonstration of the permissibility of eating and drinking on this day, even during the Hajj pilgrimage. It highlights the importance of physical sustenance, even during periods of intense spiritual focus.
It's a reminder that even during periods of intense spiritual focus, Islam prioritizes balance and recognizes the importance of physical sustenance.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the holistic nature of Islamic teachings, acknowledging the interconnectedness of our physical and spiritual well-being.
And now let's turn our attention to the joyous celebration of Eid, marking the culmination of Ramadan. Hadiths 211, 212, and 213 all emphatically state that the Prophet forbade fasting on the two Eid days, Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha.
This prohibition underscores the celebratory nature of Eid. It's a time for feasting, expressing gratitude to God, strengthening family and community bonds, and sharing our blessings with others. Fasting on these days would contradict the very spirit of joy and gratitude that Eid embodies.
It makes sense. Eid is a time to revel in the blessings of God's mercy and forgiveness, to savor the sweetness of communal unity, and to share our joy with loved ones. Fasting, with its focus on introspection and self-discipline, would be out of sync with this festive atmosphere.
Exactly. It's about recognizing the distinct nature of different occasions and aligning our actions with the spirit of each event. And to further emphasize the absolute nature of this prohibition, Hadith 214 presents a scenario where a man had vowed to fast on a specific day that happened to coincide with Eid.
Okay, what was the ruling in this case?
Yeah.
Was he allowed to fulfill his vow given his prior commitment?
The Hadith clarifies that even in this situation where a personal vow was involved, the man was instructed not to fast on Eid. The prohibition of fasting on the sacred day overrides any personal vows or intentions.
It highlights the paramount importance of respecting the sanctity of Eid and adhering to the Prophet's teachings, even when personal commitments might seem to conflict with these rulings.
You've grasped the essence of this teaching perfectly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the hierarchy of religious obligations and understanding that certain days hold a special status that requires unwavering adherence to specific guidelines.
And this principle of upholding specific prohibitions is further reinforced in Hadith 215, which lists 4 things that the Prophet forbade, including fasting on the two Eid days.
This hadith serves as a powerful reminder that even seemingly small acts of transgression can have consequences, and that faithfully following the Prophet's teachings is essential for our spiritual well-being. It's about recognizing the wisdom behind these rulings and striving to align our actions with the Prophet's exemplary conduct.
Now let's explore another set of days when fasting is prohibited. The days of Tashriq, which fall immediately after Eid al-Adha. What's the significance of these days, and why is fasting forbidden during this time?
The days of Tashriq, specifically the 11th, 12th, and 13th of Dhul Hijjah, are a continuation of the celebration and spiritual reflection that began with Eid al-Adha. These days are specifically designated for pilgrims to perform the ritual of stoning the pillars that symbolize the rejection of temptation and the reaffirmation of their commitment to God.
So these days are an integral part of the Hajj experience, representing the culmination of the pilgrim's spiritual journey and their symbolic victory over the forces of evil.
You've beautifully captured the essence of these days.
Yeah.
They are a time for rejoicing in the completion of Hajj, for expressing gratitude to God for his blessings, and for sharing the joy of this sacred occasion with fellow pilgrims and loved ones. Fasting during this time would be incongruous with the celebratory and communal spirit of these days.
It's as if fasting would dampen the festive atmosphere and create a sense of dissonance with the overarching theme of gratitude and celebration that permeates these days.
Exactly, and to address potential hardships, Hadith 216 clarifies that fasting on days of Tashriq is only permitted for those who cannot afford to offer the hadi, the sacrificial animal that is a mandatory part of the Hajj rituals.
So this exception highlights the compassionate and accommodating nature of Islamic teachings.
Yes.
It recognizes that financial constraints should not prevent individuals from fulfilling their religious obligations and offers an alternative path for those who might not be able to afford the prescribed rituals.
It's a testament to the flexibility and inclusivity of Islamic law, always seeking to make acts of worship accessible to all, regardless of their circumstances.
Hadith 217 goes a step further, providing specific guidelines for those who need to make up for the missed sacrifice during Hajj.
This hadith outlines a clear and practical solution. It explains that pilgrims performing Hajj al-Tamattu can fast for up to the day of Arafat if they cannot afford the hadi. If they haven't fasted before Eid al-Adha and still cannot afford the sacrifice, they should fast for 3 days during the days of Mina, which are the days spent in Mina during the Hajj Qadr.
It's interesting to see how the hadiths provide detailed guidance on fulfilling religious obligations, even in complex situations like the Hajj pilgrimage.
Yes, these teachings demonstrate the comprehensiveness of Islamic law, addressing various scenarios and offering practical solutions for fulfilling one's duties to God. They reflect the deep concern for ensuring that every individual, regardless of their circumstances, has the opportunity to connect with God and fulfill their spiritual obligations.
Now let's circle back to the Day of Ashura, which we discussed earlier. We've discussed its historical significance, its initial observance as a mandatory fast, and its eventual transition to an optional practice.
Right.
Hadith 218 reiterates the Prophet's final ruling on the matter, stating that fasting on Ashura is entirely optional.
This hadith confirms that while fasting on Ashura was initially encouraged, it's not a mandatory obligation. Muslims have the choice to fast or not on this day based on their personal preference and circumstances. It highlights the element of free will and personal agency within Islamic practice.
So while guidance and recommendations are provided, ultimately, individuals are responsible for making their own choices about how they choose to worship and express their faith.
You're absolutely right. Islam emphasizes the importance of both guidance and personal responsibility in matters of faith. Hadiths 219 and 220 further emphasize the optional nature of fasting on Ashura, stating that the Prophet himself stopped fasting on this day once the fasting of Ramadan was made obligatory.
It suggests that the significance of Ashura might have been somewhat overshadowed by the greater importance of fasting during Ramadan.
That's a possible interpretation. It's also worth noting that the Prophet encouraged differentiating Islamic practices from Jewish customs, which might have contributed to his decision to make fasting on Ashura optional.
It shows the dynamic nature of Islamic tradition, adapting and evolving to maintain its distinct identity and relevance within a changing social context.
Exactly. It reminds us that religious traditions are not static, but respond to new challenges and understandings over time. Hadith 221 provides an interesting anecdote about Muawiyah bin Abi Sufyan, a prominent companion, addressing the people of Medina on the day of Ashura.
Okay, what did he say? Was he reminding them about the optional nature of fasting on this day?
He reminded them of the Prophet's statement that fasting on Ashura was optional, emphasizing that they had the choice to fast or not.
Okay.
It shows how the companions continued to transmit and clarify the Prophet's teachings, ensuring that the community understood the correct practices.
It's a testament to the importance of knowledge transmission and the role of scholars in preserving and disseminating Islamic teachings.
Absolutely. The preservation and transmission of knowledge is a cornerstone of Islamic tradition, ensuring the continuity and authenticity of the faith across generations. Hadith 222 sheds light on the historical context of Ashura, mentioning that the Jews in Medina used to fast on this day to commemorate the rescue of the Israelites from their enemies.
So the practice of fasting on Ashura predates Islam.
It does, and when the Prophet learned about this practice, he initially encouraged Muslims to fast on this day as well, possibly to emphasize the shared heritage of Islam and Judaism.
But as we discussed earlier, he later made it optional,
Right.
likely to differentiate Islamic practices from Jewish customs
Exactly.
and establish a distinct identity for the Muslim community.
Exactly. It's a reminder that religious traditions are constantly evolving and adapting to maintain their distinct identity and relevance within a changing social landscape.
Hadith 223 further highlights the historical context,
Yes.
mentioning that the Jews in Medina considered Ashura a day of celebration.
Right.
The Prophet recommended that Muslims fast on this day, possibly to shift the focus from celebration to spiritual reflection and devotion.
That's an interesting observation. It suggests that the Prophet might have seen fasting as a way to imbue this day with a deeper spiritual meaning, aligning it with Islamic values and practices.
It's another example of how Islamic tradition adapted existing customs and reinterpreted them through a spiritual lens, imbuing them with new meaning and purpose.
Absolutely. It shows the dynamic nature of Islamic thought and practice, constantly seeking to integrate and elevate various aspects of life in accordance with the teachings of the faith.
Hadith 224 provides an interesting insight into the Prophet's personal preference for fasting on the day of Ashura. It states that he never sought to fast on any day more than this day, apart from the months of Ramadan.
This hadith suggests that Ashura held a special significance for the Prophet, even though he later made fasting on this day optional for the general Muslim community.
It's a reminder that personal spiritual practices can vary, and that what might be recommended for the majority might not necessarily be the practice of every individual, even within the prophetic tradition.
It's a beautiful example of how Islam allows for individual variation and personal preferences in worship, while still providing clear guidelines and recommendations for the community as a whole.
It's a reminder that our spiritual journey is a deeply personal one, guided by both communal teachings and our own unique connection with God.
Beautifully said. It's about finding that balance between communal unity and individual expression within the framework of faith.
Finally, Hadith 225 brings us full circle, recounting an incident similar to the one we discussed earlier,
Yes.
where the Prophet instructed those who had already eaten on the day of Ashura to complete their fast, and those who hadn't eaten to continue their fast.
This hadith reinforces the importance of consistency and avoiding disruption once a fast has begun, even on a special day like Ashura.
Right.
It's a reminder that fulfilling our commitments to God should take precedence over personal preferences or convenience.
It's a powerful lesson in discipline and honoring our obligations to the divine, recognizing that our word once given should be upheld with sincerity and dedication.
Absolutely. It highlights the sincerity and dedication that are essential for true spiritual growth and connection with God.
It's amazing how much ground we've covered just talking about these hadiths, you know?
Oh, I know. It's fascinating, right?
Yeah, going from the foundational pillars of Islam to the, intricacies of fasting on specific days.
Yeah. And all through these stories from the Prophet's life.
Yeah, and, one of the things that's really striking to me is this emphasis on balance that we're seeing. It seems like the Prophet Muhammad was constantly guiding people towards this sustainable and holistic approach to faith.
Absolutely.
Not just in fasting, but, in all aspects of life.
It's a reminder that true spirituality isn't about extremes or pushing ourselves to the brink.
Yeah.
It's about integrating faith into every facet of our lives, finding that harmony between our spiritual aspirations and our worldly responsibilities.
Now, before we wrap up our deep dive into fasting,
Okay.
I want to kind of revisit this idea that we touched on earlier,
Mm-hmm.
the concept of fasting as a shield.
Yeah.
We talked about how it protects us from trials and temptations.
Yes.
But I'm curious to explore this metaphor a bit deeper.
Okay.
Like, how exactly does this shielding work?
Okay.
What's the mechanism behind it?
That's a great question. And The hadiths themselves don't really delve into the specific mechanics of how fasting acts as a shield, but we can explore some possible interpretations based on Islamic teachings and the wisdom behind this practice.
Let's unpack that. I feel like there's a lot there to explore.
Okay, so one way to understand the shielding is through the lens of self-discipline and willpower.
Okay.
When we fast, we're essentially training ourselves to resist our basic urges and desires.
Right.
We're choosing to deny ourselves something that's normally permissible, like food and drink, for the sake of God.
It's like a spiritual workout
It is.
for our willpower muscle.
Exactly. And just like any muscle, the more we exercise it, the stronger it becomes.
Right.
So when we regularly engage in fasting, we're strengthening our ability to resist impulses and control our desires, not just in relation to food, but in other areas of life as well.
So this enhanced self-control can then help us, overcome temptations and make more righteous choices in general.
Precisely. It's like building a spiritual resilience, a fortitude that empowers us to withstand the pull of negativity and make choices that align with our values and beliefs.
But it seems like there's more to this shielding than just willpower. There's also this profound spiritual dimension to it.
You're absolutely right. Fasting cultivates a sense of humility and dependence on God.
Right.
When we abstain from food and drink, we're acknowledging our need for his sustenance.
Right.
We're recognizing that our very existence is dependent on his grace and mercy.
It's a powerful shift in perspective.
It is.
Moving away from a sense of self-sufficiency and recognizing our utter reliance on God.
Exactly. And this recognition of our dependence on God fosters a deeper connection with him.
Right.
As we turn away from worldly attachments and focus on our relationship with the divine, our spiritual awareness expands.
So it's like fasting creates this space for us to detach from the material world.
Yeah.
And kind of reconnect with our spiritual core.
Precisely. And this heightened spiritual awareness acts as a shield against negativity and temptation.
Yeah.
When our hearts are filled with the remembrance of God, it becomes harder for worldly distractions and desires to take root.
It's as if we're creating a spiritual barrier, a protective aura that deflects negativity and strengthens our resolve.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And this spiritual fortification can also work on a more subtle level, influencing our thoughts and perceptions.
Tell me more about that. How does fasting impact our thought patterns?
When we fast, we become more attuned to our internal landscape.
Okay.
We notice how our desires and cravings ebb and flow throughout the day.
Right.
We observe how our mood and energy levels fluctuate.
Right.
This heightened awareness allows us to identify and challenge negative thoughts and patterns that might normally go unnoticed.
It's like fasting gives us this mental and emotional detox,
It does.
allowing us to clear out the clutter and focus on what truly matters.
Exactly. It's a time for introspection and self-reflection, enabling us to examine the root causes of our negative thoughts and behaviors, and to seek healing and purification from within.
So it seems like fasting works on these multiple levels to create this protective shield.
Yes.
It strengthens our willpower, it deepens our spiritual connection, and fosters greater self-awareness, making us more resilient and less susceptible to negative influences.
You've summarized it beautifully. It's a holistic practice that impacts our physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, empowering us to navigate the challenges of life with greater strength, clarity, and a profound sense of connection with God.
It's truly remarkable how much wisdom and insight we can glean from these hadiths.
It is.
It feels like we've barely scratched the surface, yet we've uncovered so many profound truths about fasting.
It's been an incredible journey of exploration, hasn't it? And as you continue your own study and reflection, I encourage you to delve deeper into these hadiths, pondering their meanings and seeking their guidance in your own life.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is a lifelong endeavor, and that these ancient teachings hold timeless wisdom that can continue to nourish our hearts and guide us on our spiritual journey.
Absolutely. May your exploration of these hadiths deepen your understanding of fasting and inspire you to embrace its transformative power in your own life.
And until next time, may your pursuit of knowledge and ihsan continue to illuminate your path.